CDAO is sort of central, like Aditi was just talking about, to a lot of these integration efforts to bring new capabilities to bear to support warfighting needs of today. Margie's at the center of a lot of those efforts as the deputy leading several initiatives that we'll talk about today. But thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it. We just talked with Aditi about how we're trying to bring a lot of new players into the defense ecosystem and try to align solutions with things that the combatant commanders or commanders in general are looking to address. What is the CDAO's role in that process, generally, and then we can talk more specifically about some of the initiatives you guys are pursuing.
Yeah, sure. So CDAO, relatively new organization, at least it doesn't feel that way, but it is. Stood up in June of 2022. Our mission is to accelerate the department's adoption of data analytics and AI. So not that big of a mission, but our focus is on that question of acceleration of adoption. And we know inside of DoD, one of the largest organizations in the world, 3.5 million people, over 160 different countries where we have a presence, not to mention under the sea and in outer space. And the Pentagon is not going to be the source of all the innovation that could happen in that type of ecosystem and environment. And so accelerating adoption really means making government data accessible to both government and industry and our allies and partners in order to create capabilities necessary to solve DoD problems. And the more we can do that across multiple levels and across multiple partners, the better. And so we have a wide range of theories and hypotheses of how to make that happen. And we take a really experimentation-based approach to learn and to codify the things that work. Yeah.
So obviously this requires some pipeline basically of good ideas, the operational concepts that we want to empower, and then maybe some material solutions that are part of that, and then a process by which we sort of assess how they can come together in interesting ways and how we can sort of layer on top of that artificial intelligence and data analytics and interoperability. So what's the engine that you guys are working to or developing to do that?
So I'll talk about two things. One is a little bit more abstract. We have a hierarchy of needs, as we call it. We put out a new DoD data analytics and AI adoption strategy just a couple months ago. In there, you can read all about the hierarchy of needs, but basically, it's not like a Maslow's hierarchy where one is necessary precondition for another, but it helps us think through the maturity of the department or the maturity of a project when it comes to delivering capability. So at the core foundation is data quality. Lots of people would love to jump to the algorithm first, but really getting access to that data, making sure you understand it, you understand where it's not high quality, where it is high quality, what it's good for, what it's not good for, is it labeled and tagged and all that fun stuff for the project that you need to do is step one. And unfortunately, I'm probably your most boring guest inside of this conference when it comes to that, because it is just really specific work. The people who like it love it, which is so wonderful. And we've got a ton of them in the department that are just really enthusiastic, because when you get that right, you unlock the top two pieces of the pyramid. One is analytics. We like to put metrics with that, because a lot of times in order to really get a result in a project, you have to understand how DoD does business. And metrics are a really great conversation, not like the typical metrics that we get, which are several pages of very discrete things, but really an understanding of how does the system or how does the process or how does the workflow work, and how do you know if you're actually improving it? So if we want a different outcome, we have to have a sense of how we do business today. And a lot of that in DoD is passed on person to person. Yeah. It's like knowledge you acquire by being around for a while, which is good in some extent, but not necessarily replicable or sustainable in other cases. And so we look at analytics and metrics kind of in that block. Sometimes people ask for AI, they just need a dashboard, or they just need a simple regression. How do these variables relate, or a driver tree? And then at the top is AI, and once you have a sense of where you want to play there, you can put AI on it as well. Around the pyramid, we have this thing called foundational enablers, and so these are all the processes, talent management, acquisition, policy type things that have to happen to make this repeatable across the department at scale. So that's kind of how we do that more broadly. And then we have specific projects that we take on from everything from business metrics to JADC2, and that's how we kind of think through how we're going to approach those different efforts.
So when we think about that pyramid, starting with the data, the data quality, our daughter is a data scientist. She loves
fantastic.
She loves doing the
Would
data
she come
cleaning,
to work
data
for
engineering.
CDAO?
That's right.
I'll
Connect you with her later.
Great.
Yeah. So, so that's obviously something that's absolutely essential to anything else, like you said. So, are there ways to automate that process to some degree, or does it have to be? I mean, because it seems like it's really a slog and a manual process in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think there potentially could be, but the challenge is data scientists have this incredible skill set as translators between mission and data. And if you find the good ones, they not only just work through the slog of tagging data or labeling the right columns and things like that. But they actually translate what fields are really valuable to the operators, or where should we focus our efforts to improve high quality data versus other fields that we might not care about. There's, of course, I think over 4,000 data systems inside the Department of Defense, and so you could imagine that the same data appears in different ways in multiple systems, and so how do you actually rationalize that and correlate that together? And so without a doubt, you can write scripts to do some of that once you understand that, but I think at least, actually probably forever, we will need the thought process of folks that can do that mission to data translation.
So to what degree do you have to have that as an interaction with operators? I mean, does this end up having to be something that you have to embed, like we were just talking about with the DD, embedding people with those operational units to say, okay, let me help you, let's translate your data into something useful?
Yeah, ideally, there's two approaches that I think have to go together. We do this through the AI and Data Acceleration Initiative, or ADA, where we put people at combatant commands with data science and algorithmic expertise, but we also have a hub back at CDAO. And so why do we do that? The department is very large. We don't have to solve the same problem multiple times if we can avoid it. And so, yes, I think you do have to put the experts, without a doubt, I know, you have to put the experts inside the different organizations. They have to understand the workflows. Even if you can create the same algorithm across the same problem set, how people actually ingest that into their workflow is really important. And what we see, we do a bunch of experimentation. We get some really good results in experimentation, but if we don't see those same workflows replicated in actual operations, you don't actually get the same value. And so you get the same application, the same algorithm, it's available, but it's not used to the full extent. And so we keep a hub back at CDAO to look at data quality across the department. Our director, Craig Martell, has a concept from industry called core concept data, which is COCO, but it's not contractor-owned, contractor-operated. Anyway, but it's this idea that 20% of your data unlocks 80% of your use cases, and we generally find that, right? It's personnel, it's logistics or readiness information, it's your people, your stuff, your locations. They tend to be similar across the board. So we keep that at CDAO so that we can look functionally at aligning communities across different organizations, but then we have to go to the place where the work's being done to make sure we understand it.
So to what degree do you find that an organization or an operational command has to change its workflow to make the best use of the data and the way it's structured today? Because I feel like a lot of this, and we start out as a one-way conversation of the warfighter's got a certain way of doing business, engineer this data so it supports the way I do business today, when in fact maybe it would be better if they just adapted their workflow to a much easier way to use the data.
Yeah, it's a constant give and take. I would say, I'm trying to guess the percentage here to be data driven, but at least 90% of the time there's benefit from changing the workflow. Right. And that's not always clear up front. I'd say 10% of the time that's clear up front. And so in this process of bringing new technologies, new data and analytics into a current workflow, you may start off with, hey, let's help digitize some of what you do. But in the process, most people realize they can get so much more out of it if they started to adjust. This is so hard, right? Because in an individual workflow, and a lot of times we pick the user use case where you've got one user working through something. It's easy to digitize that, automate that. But when you start bringing in the handoff of information, which is really what helps enrich our decision making, is that we get diverse perspectives on some information, and then we're able to bring it together and present options to decision makers. Well, we have different perspectives on different data, and so as those workflows start to integrate, not only do you get the normal process disagreement, but you may also get, well, I like the way we do it now. Well, I like this way. Well, I like a different way, which is why we experiment a lot inside of CDAO.
And then when we go to like a JADC2 type of idea, like we're trying to operationalize this with a group of units. So then some of it is not just kind of the predilection of somebody to operate in a certain way, but it's also some of this is hardwired into these machines, or at least programmed into the machines in a way that's not easily changed. So how do you navigate that back and forth?
One step at a time, I think. It really is. So we take a very mission lens focus, and we'll start off with specific workflows, one of which we have, of course, coined a new acronym that has many, many letters. So many letters, we put a number in it. Combatant Command and Coalition. It's C5P. It's Combatant Command and Coalition, Collaboration and Planning. Okay, C5P, there we go. What is that? We know from the global integration mission that has been given to the Joint Staff for a couple of years now that pulling together decision-making across combatant commands, especially on whether it's global or whether it's multi-regional, is really critical to informing the chairman and the secretary's decisions and advice to the president. And as we look across those workflows, there are, really Microsoft Office, which, is wonderful based processes for doing that. But to digitize those workflows creates so many different opportunities because awareness is extended across multiple organizations. The type of options, the number of options, the creativity of options is changing as we bring those groups closer together. And then we're really finding out, which applications are ready to jump in and which, are digitally ready, which ones are not digitally ready. The cool thing is, in some cases, you can just simply go in and change how metadata is exchanged and received, and you get a completely new capability that you don't have to go through any sort of JROC or POM process. Yeah. In other cases, I think as we get closer to the tactical edge, the physics and the weapon systems are going to be a little bit difficult.
Right. So when you look at the, when we look at the idea of there's thousands of data systems in the department. So how do you triage sort of, well, what am I even going to tackle? Because some things are probably going to be systems that hopefully we will eventually walk away from. Like aphids or things, although we've said that for decades now. But how do you sort of triage which data systems I'm going to pursue and which kill chains or which workflows I'm going to try to tackle?
So we focused on the global integration mission thread, and we focused on long-range maritime fires, specifically for the Indo-Pacific, as our first two mission threads, which are joint and combined, and so encompass a wide variety of systems, even though they sound like they're narrow, and for DoD they are. They're discrete enough where we can actually, and we've done two global information dominance experiments or guide events on this. We do a guide event every 90 days. In Guide 7, we actually just digitize the targeting data through the workflow for that second mission thread. Can we go from the combatant command all the way down to the tactical level? Can the shooter actually roger up that they have it? Can they fire a weapon off the quality of data that they receive? That was wonderful just to track the data paths from, again, like the geeky perspective. But now we know what works, what doesn't, where do we have to go after. In Guide 8, we were able to do the same thing with even more weapons associated with that kill chain. And we're able to look across the joint force at where different systems needed to make adjustments, and that's how we do it. And we give the feedback to the programs, and we take a look at is this a simple change? Is this a more hardware or OFP related thing?
So when you do that, is there an option then? I mean, once you've digitized that workflow, can you turn around then and look at ways to virtually assess it to see how could I, what are the things that seem to really make a difference here and which things don't, and to guide sort of program decisions, like if I want to go build new stuff or add new stuff, what's the most effective things to add. So I mean, kind of virtualizing that machine, if you will. That
yeah, like in a modeling and sim environment or something. Yeah. I'm sure you could, and I'm sure the services have. In fact, I know they have in many different places. How we bring that together as a joint force, and especially at the operational level and above, I think we get a lot of that through experimentation, but could absolutely do more through virtualization. From that perspective, yeah.
So I'm going to, just to let the audience know, we're going to open up to questions here in a couple minutes. We'll go to, Vago, what time do we need to start the panel?
It's 14:15, and
right, okay.
you have 2 minutes of 14 minutes.
Okay, got it. All right. Just want to make sure I kind of where I am. So, but I will open up to questions here in a minute. But so you talked a little bit about international partners. Yeah. So we do projects with the Japanese and the Australians in particular right now. How do you work with them to look at ways to sort of make your digital fabrics work together? Because right now I get the impression that unless they buy the exact systems the US is buying, there's not really that easy interoperability.
Yeah, so we've been focused on Five Eyes mostly first. Mm-hmm. The UK has been a partner in Guide, I think, since Guide 5. Excuse me, in Guide 8, we actually were able to successfully pass targets across native systems and show what we can do just by having open interfaces. And the same definition for what's a target, what information do you really need, and what does that look like? Hey, that's a small step to where we really need to go, I think, in terms of digitizing and being able to share all the information that we need to. I know Australia has been an observer in a couple of those exercises, and what we are trying to build inside of CDAO is we'll call it a spec for how to exchange data. We really want multiple companies to be able to come in, talk with a combatant commander, talk with a user in the field, get a sense of a problem, and very, very rapidly be able to get a contract and get access to government data and access to government networks and be able to solve it in, let's say, days, maybe weeks, but definitely not, if it's really hard, maybe months, but definitely not the years it takes at this point right now. And so we have an acquisition arm inside of CDAO that's looking at reducing barriers and working with DIU on entry there. We got a really creative authorizing official from the Air Force that believes in reciprocity and risk management and not checklists to really help us think through, how do we keep our data secure but also make it available. And then this last piece on the technical side is this data integration layer. It's not really a layer. It's a collection of data mesh services. It's a collection of data accesses where we can reduce the barrier for anyone who has a problem to be able to find the data that they need and apply it to their problem set, and make sure that once they bring it into an environment, whether it's industry provided or government, the enriched data product can be shared back out. And that's really what we care about. We want to make sure that the government, we often talk about government ownership of data.
Right.
The ownership word is really about the accessibility and interoperability across the force, and that it's not stovepiped or pushed into a corner somewhere, but we fully want to leverage all of the richness that industry brings to make products better.
So when you think about how you acquire these capabilities or work with software providers, for example, so I think what you're, at least as I would interpret it, is the government is owning sort of the interfaces between these different systems, and then you may have multiple providers that are actually delivering the software that works on the opposite sides of those interfaces. Yeah. So in a lot of ways, are you still letting them retain the kind of ownership of that software in a way that allows them to basically have their intellectual property and be able to have a business model that relies on it?
Yes, absolutely. We want companies to make money. We want people to come to America with their innovative ideas, start a company, make money, and enjoy working for the government. Right. And we're working on all those things. Yeah, without a doubt. What we don't want is just the raw data back out. We want the enriched data. And so I think where the difference has been in the past has been, you can have your data back, but anything that we did to make it better inside the ecosystem, you can't have. And so we're saying, no, we want all that back. Ideally, American innovative commercial talent is one of our hugest assets, strategic assets inside of the US. And the more we can support that ecosystem and cultivate that, the more we want. And ultimately, we can get interoperability through how we define what we need and through those interfaces. Yeah.
And so, that sounds like, so if you're a software company, that sounds like a great model to be able to, provide services and capability to the government, and still, not have to get your stuff absorbed into some larger lead system integrators, combat system, for example, or whatever. How do you, make it so that these individual companies can be, managed separately? When you have your new authorizer for contracts for software, are you having to make sure that you've got basically vendors that are providing a kind of ecosystem sort of service, or different than those that might be providing the AI-enabled control system for a particular unmanned vehicle?
Yeah, we talk a lot in CDAO about the difference between technical decisions and business decisions. And so the technical underpinning, I think, is pretty straightforward about how to design something well, or to be interoperable and accessible. The business decisions are a little bit more complex, because we do need companies that can provide sustainability and reliability and help desk support. And they may not be the same companies that are going to give you the next most creative algorithm, right? And I think but that's something that we also want to experiment through. We want to work with the acquisition arms of the department to really figure out best practices there. And I think you're going to see a bunch of different models throughout DoD as we learn through that. But we're not ready to kind of say, hey, there's a centralized way to do it. But just be really thoughtful about how you combine innovation and sustainability and reliability, because our mission is warfighting.
Right. No, that definitely makes sense. So one last thing I would ask before we turn it to the audience is, in terms of, a lot of the work we focused on is looked at, how do we enable decision support to commanders, how to explore the option set available to them. And you talked a little bit about how you do that through global integration. So you're providing options to the SecDef based on what's happening in different theaters. But getting down to the tactical or the operational level, are you also building the kinds of decision support tools that would ride on top of the data that you've been able to engineer and make high quality and share? Are you also helping to provide those to warfighters to unlock courses of action or kill chains that they didn't know were there beforehand?
Yeah, so we have said that the work that we will do will really stop at that operational levels to tie the combatant commands with the Joint Task Force commanders. In some cases, those Joint Task Force commanders are service components. But we work very closely with Project Overmatch, Project Convergence, ABMS, and C3BM Office, and Air Force to make sure that the work that we are doing will enable them to also use data that's coming from different parts of the theater. But we've left most of the joint kill chain development to the services to really work on. And we think that's a good division of, the business piece. The services have a lot of those pieces as well as expertise. But in Guide, we have fielded a couple applications just to be able to test whether or not the data is flowing, because we need to see where it goes, but people have to interact with it. And so, so we've got a couple in the experimentation realm that are exciting and promising that the services can definitely look at and learn from.
But it's about getting them the data, because fundamentally, if they don't have that ability to share data across multiple domains, systems, services, you're not going to be able to you're not opening up those kill chains or those courses of action. So let's take some questions from the audience. So if you have you, ma'am, yes. So we'll bring the microphone. He's right over there now. So state your name and affiliation.
Hi, I'm Brandy Vincent from Defense Scoop. Thanks for doing this. Good to see you, Margie. I want to stick on Guide for a second. I remember whenever Guide 8 kicked off, a big priority for the CDAO was reaching a minimum viable capability for JADC2. So I'm wondering, was that reached in Guide 8? And can you talk to us about where Guide 9 is going and what the status of that is?
Yeah, sure. So we're going to do an outbrief of Guide 8 internal to the building in a week or so. So I'll keep my comments a little bit more vague than if we had already briefed them out. But we did. Now, minimum viable capability is largely a connection of existing capabilities that we have today that have shared data in new ways and have brought together a combination of new applications, new data services with users to create better workflows. Now, we have done that in the experimentation environment. There are a couple things that we need to consider as we bring them into operations. One is a full appropriation in FY24, which is absolutely critical. We doubled or more our budget in CDAO from 23 to 24 and don't have any access to that funding right now to make that minimum viable capability truly accessible and robust across the FitUp, and so we're really excited about the potential for an appropriation. The other is, back to our conversation about workflows, the adoption on the warfighting side and the ConOps side to now say, okay, what we did in experimentation, we can do in the real world every day. The cool thing about Guide is once you make those connections inside of experimentation, we are dealing with live data. We are on live networks. There's nothing experimental or modeling about what we're doing. And so they are available for warfighters today. There's no program of record or POM process change that needs to happen, no additional investment other than the full appropriation in 24. So absolutely, we have a new connection, a new set of connections across multiple data fabrics and applications. In Guide 9, we are going to align with a couple exercises the Army's doing in Project Convergence 4, because we really want to see how the combatant commands and the joint task forces now take that down to a tactical level with a service. Army's leading it, but it's been a joint exercise for a while, or I should say experiment for a while. Army's really creative about how to look at things that work and things that don't work, so they make a really great partner. They're also really interested in the institutional pieces of this, and we've had a couple conversations from their learnings at the tactical level back to how do we think about some of those systems changes. So we'll align with them in the March timeframe, and then for Guide 10, we will align with INDOPACOM's Valiant Shield effort, which I know is also a focus of other capability development, and really excited to align with the global information or global integration experiment, GIE, that the Joint Staff runs. And so we're really trying to take Guide to align with existing activities and start to bring those data connections closer to stuff that people are already doing.
And that's a great point that I should have probably hammered that earlier, but since software is naturally scalable, once you've created this set of workflows that are, have interoperable data and you've completed, an effects chain, basically it's automatically scaled and it's a leave behind at, whatever degree.
That's exactly right, yeah.
So one more question before we have to shift over because Vago wants to do the panel. So, one more question. Anybody from the audience have a question? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I have actually a last question. So so we didn't really talk about, but the public is getting this crash course in AI thanks to ChatGPT and all these other Geminis and these other systems. So I think it's better. Gemini's better. But in any event, so you're obviously trying to provide some AI-enabled tools to the department. Mostly, I guess, focused around decision making and thought and thinking about what are the options available to commanders. But obviously, your work in the Navy Digital Office, previous to this, also there's a lot of places AI can get used in the department beyond just decision support for leaders. So what are some examples where you guys have been able to kind of push that out to the warfighter?
A big one is actually on autonomy. And so the Joint AI Center had started a really interesting project called Smart Sensor. They wanted a fully autonomous MQ-9, not just the aircraft vehicle, but the sensors. And so for several years, DoD's been looking at how do you really do unmanned autonomy enabled by AI. And so Replicator is actually just here at a really great time. We're looking at how to do a data hub as part of AI data hub as part of Replicator to accelerate that learning across multiple companies and different services. And so I think the autonomy use case is front and center in our mind, and to bring those best practices. We are really focused on the scaffolding, we call it, which are kind of not necessarily all of the potential AI projects that we could do inside of CDAO, but really how do we enable all of the other organizations inside the government to have access to labeled data and not have to go find it themselves, We are very focused on responsible AI. So how do we do test and evaluation? Responsible AI, isn't just is the algorithm performing as we expected, but is the operator aware of when that performance changes? Because we often forget that once you field AI, you have to continually monitor how it is performing and make adjustments as you go. And the operator is right directly in the center of that. And so the test and evaluation and how we bring either into contracts or into how the government does business, the continuous monitoring and adjustment and training of those pieces there. And then we've got Task Force Lima, which is our generative AI task force. I think we're over, I'm going to get the number wrong, but we've got 100 use cases or so of large language models across the department. We'll have our CDAO annual symposium that's coming up at the end of February. Huge LLM track there, and not just in terms of speaking events, but interactions with industry around how robust are the models, how do we give confidence to our users based off of what the models are providing back, and we look at that through another kind of hierarchy, but it's different to support HR processes than supporting commander's decision making, and so our tolerance levels there may be slightly off. But we're thinking through how to enable the department to do those as well.
Yeah, you can think about it, there's thousands of use cases for employing large language models on the trove of data that the department has available. And so test and evaluation, I guess, the big takeaway there is you have to get away from testing against specific, very well-defined metrics and look instead at kind of behaviors and how a system performs, and it's consistent with how we thought it would perform.
Yeah, you can definitely have metrics, but AI is very environment dependent. We saw this in Project Maven in some cases, in the ground war, where you may come in with certain expectations for how an algorithm performs because of the data it was trained on, and then you go into a fight and things don't look the way they used to. And so now the performance expectation is different. Doesn't mean that they have no utility, but you just have to retrain. And so there's going to be an interesting learning curve as DoD goes from hardware to software and now from software to AI. But I think we're postured to do that. Yeah.
Well, I think we'll end it there. So thank you very much, Margaret Palmieri, for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to take a quick break and reset the stage here so we can have our panel led by Vago Muradian.
Yes.